Okay guys, this is probably your easiest practical. This is practical number 4, the vertebral column. So you will probably notice that there are numbers behind some of the vertebrae. You will learn eventually that we have 7 cervical vertebrae. These are the most superior. Then we have 12 thoracic vertebrae, and we have 5 excuse me, lumbar vertebrae. So as you can see, this is really simple. You're not going to have to know much detail, but you are going to have to know the characteristics of each of them so that you can determine when you get to the practical, you can pick them out of a lineup. So again, cervical vertebrae, what makes a cervical vertebra, and these 3 are cervical. The first 2 are special. We'll talk about that in a minute. But you need to understand that what makes a cervical vertebra are these holes called transverse foramen. Foramen are holes. And these allow for the cervical nerves, the cranial nerves. So the other thoracic and lumbar do not have these little holes that are called transverse foramen. You don't need to know that, but you need to know that when they're there, that makes that a cervical vertebra. So the first 2 are unique. This one is called C1. This is called the atlas. This is actually where those occipital condyles on the skull will sit on your spinal column. Okay, so you'll notice it's very, very unique. This is the rest of them. This is what the rest of your cervical vertebrae look like, 3 through 7. Totally different looking than this guy. This is C2. This is called the axis. I remember S or T comes before X. Atlas, axis. This is C1. C1 sits right on top, right on top of here. And your head rotates on this little tiny thing called the dens, which you don't have to know. But your head rotates along with some muscles and ligaments that allow that to happen. So C1, the atlas, sits on C2, the axis. And then you have the rest of the cervical vertebrae below that. So these 3, this is your typical C3 through C7. You see the holes right here, the 2 little tiny transverse foramen. Yeah, so you can see that those are very unique. These 2, C1, C2, are unique to C3 through C7. And mostly they look like this, C3 through C7. Okay, so that is the cervical vertebrae. The next is going to be your thoracic, okay? The trademark of a thoracic vertebrae, most people think it's this big spiny thing. This is called the spinous process. But really what you're looking for is on these things called transverse processes, there is a little dent right here on each one of them. Those are called facets for the articulation of your ribs. Your ribs actually attach to your spinal cord, your spinal column. So you have 12 ribs. You should have 12 thoracic vertebrae. Okay, some people have more ribs. They just don't attach. They're called floating ribs. Okay, this would be, that's the trademark of your thoracic vertebra. Those little facets, and they're like little dents. There's one of them right here, and on the other side, there's another one right here. Okay, lumbar vertebrae, they are just big. Obviously, they have to provide shock absorption because these are on the bottom of your spinal column. So you need to see that this is a thick body. These do not have the facets for rib articulation, nor do they have the holes for nerves to pass through. So, and you can see how big these suckers are. So there are 5 of these. They stack one on top of the other, and there are discs in between that kind of provide shock absorption. But you can see the difference between that guy and a thoracic. See how thick the body is right here? And obviously, these guys are way smaller. Okay. The next is going to be the sacrum. This is going to sit on the bottom, so this would be the last lumbar vertebra, and this is going to sit on top of the sacrum. This is a set of 5 fused vertebrae that we've evolved from our tail. So this is going to be the sacrum. The superior articulating facets, there are these 2 very smooth surfaces that allow for the articulation of L5, which is the last lumbar vertebra. Okay. The median sacral crest, if I turn it to the side, you can see this kind of jutting out bone. That is the median sacral crest. Okay. Sacral foramina, remember I said foramen were holes, foramina are little holes. These allow for the nerves from the spinal cord, some of the nerves to pass through. I don't have a coccyx here, but there would be a little tailbone here. That is your coccyx. You can find those loose, but I'd rather you show me on the skeleton. You can show me that on the skeleton. And if we look on the skeleton, we can go over here and look on George here, and here's the sacrum, and then here is your coccyx. Let's go back up here. Here are your cervical vertebrae. There should be 12 thoracic vertebrae, and then there are 5 lumbar vertebrae. And that's the practical number 4, the vertebral column. Pretty simple.